And thank you all for joining me here today as well. It's great to have you with me. This will be quite a short session. We've got half an hour together today, and hopefully I can provide something to you that is useful and interesting and that you can take away back to your organization and your business to make a change. So today I'm going to be talking about the foundations for AI, why they matter, and what you can do to improve them as well. I think we often jump straight into conversations about data and AI without agreeing on what we actually mean by some of the key terms. So I wanted to take a moment just to establish a shared understanding between us today. I know I'm certainly guilty sometimes of keeping questions to myself, and then it feels like maybe it's a bit too late to ask them. You don't want to look silly. But I really do think it's important that we're all coming at this from the same place and that everyone feels able to join in the conversation around data and AI, and that the vocabulary and the understanding isn't what holds you back. We can really only have useful conversations if we're all coming in at the same level, and that we all have a shared understanding. It's really important to me that we keep barriers to entry low on these conversations. I think quite often with technology, there is a precedent of the barriers to entry being raised really quickly, the language becomes really complicated, and there's a select group of people who are the only ones who are allowed to talk about this and be knowledgeable on this. But, you know, let's keep those barriers to entry really low so that we can all join in the conversations about data and AI, because this is something that is going to affect all of our lives, both personally and professionally, and we should all feel confident and equipped to do that. I think each of us deserves to have a voice and to be involved in this conversation. So starting at the very beginning, what is data? Data is generated by human activity and is therefore a reflection of how humans interact with your systems, your tools, your applications within an organization. So this comes through things like user input, through systems, sensors, logs, calculations, and on its own, data is really just a raw material. If we look then at what is information, it is data that has been made useful. It's been processed or organized or labeled so that it has meaning and context behind it. And this is really what enables that decision making. So data without any sort of context is pretty useless, really. If I just gave you a big long list of numbers, you know, what are you going to do with that? Really, you need to know where it's come from, why, how it was generated, who generated it potentially, all of these sorts of things in order to make it useful. So information is data that has been processed, organized, and given meaning and context. And this is what enables decision making. And then if we look at AI, what is AI? At its core, it is just a series of algorithms. It has roots in statistics and probability, and these are the algorithms that sit behind it to help you identify patterns and relationships. And the quality of the AI very, very heavily depends on the quality of the data that you're putting in and the type of algorithms that sit behind it. And I know that algorithms can feel like quite an out there concept potentially, but at its very core, when I was learning about statistics and probability, which is how you lead into algorithms, it's as simple as looking at, you know, if I roll a dice 10 times, how many times could I predict that it'll land on a 6 or land on a 1? And that is really at the heart of it. So you're predicting how likely something is to happen, how statistically likely something is to happen. So I know it might seem like the, you know, the AI that we see out in the world at the minute, ChatGPT and things, are thinking for themselves, but essentially it is a probability and statistics machine behind the veil that's out there. And algorithms themselves are literally just a set of instructions to be followed in calculations. They are just rules that tell systems how to process data. AI is a class of an algorithm, and that is rooted in statistics and probability, and they learn patterns from the data. And as always, the outputs are only as good as the data that sits behind them. And what is an algorithm? This is an algorithm. I know it looks kind of horrible, but it's a load of Greek letters. It's calculus at its heart, and we're looking at things like regression algorithms and things. So if it feels something that, you know, is intangible at the minute, this is literally what it is at its heart. You know, obviously it's much more complex and there's a lot of them, but behind it all, you know, it's not magic. It's this algorithm that sits behind things. So I think, it's important that we can pause here and digest this information. These topics sometimes are made to feel exclusive or intimidating, and that can prevent people from engaging with it. But if data underpins so many decisions that we make, then everyone deserves to understand it. So now that we're aligned on what these things actually are, we can start to explore why so many organizations struggle to turn that data into actual value. Many organizations are very keen to adopt AI, but lack clarity on their readiness for that adoption. Readiness is often framed as a technology question. Do we have the right platforms, the right tools, the right models? But in reality, readiness is much broader than that. This is a framing that we use often with clients. This is our six-pillar approach to AI readiness. And we found this has really landed with our clients, and helps to show that it isn't just a technology or an IT problem. There is so much more to AI readiness than just those two things. It spans things like infrastructure and skills, organizational culture, governance, ethics, ways of working. But at the center and at the heart of it all, I am biased, but data sits at the heart of all of those things. Accurate, complete, and consistent data is essential if insights and automation delivered by analytics products are going to be high quality, trusted, and actionable. If people don't trust the output, then they just will not use it. And if they don't use it, then the investment doesn't translate into value. And you spent all this money on a solution that has no return on investment. There's also a risk angle here that we need to think about. So when organizations move from that typical human to human or even human in the loop analysis to something more automated, automated recommendations or actions, the tolerance for ambiguity really drops. So you need to know what data is being used, what it means, how reliable it is. Otherwise, you end up either blocking progress because nobody trusts the output, or worse, you're making decisions confidently on top of uncertainty and on top of data that you don't know where it came from, you don't know how correct it is, you don't know how accurate it is. So the key message here for me is data isn't just one pillar of readiness, it really underpins all of them. If your data foundations are weak, every other readiness pillar becomes much harder to realize. This slide, I think, really captures what we see most often when organizations accelerate. So when I'm out there speaking to clients across all different sectors, these things tend to come up across the board. So if one of these resonates with you, trust me, you are not alone in this. We see problems with things like data silos. So data silos is where information is inaccessible or unnecessarily restricted, which prevents growth and forces teams into coming up with their own workarounds quite often as well. Inconsistent data flows. So this is where different parts of the organization get different answers to the same question, which creates confusion, politics, and delay. If you don't have definitions around things like what does headcount mean, defining these key terms, then people will have different interpretations. If there isn't one source of truth for these things, people will pull together information that they think is correct and is correct by their own definition, but you're speaking two different languages essentially on this. And then we look at things like skills shortages. So it's by no means just a technology problem. We have to think about how people within the organization feel about these changes and how equipped they are to deal with them as well. So skills shortages and limited data and AI literacy is where data becomes something a small group of people within the organization do, rather than something the whole organization can participate in and use confidently. Obviously, this creates bottlenecks and can create some problems around the culture of how data is used. Poor data quality is the classic one, but this is inaccurate, incomplete, inconsistent data, which undermines people's trust in reporting and analytics. If you have no feedback loop, so where data only flows in one direction, so people can't improve quality at the source, the same issues are going to appear month after month. If you have an unclear data strategy where there's so much to do and it feels so overwhelming that nobody knows where to start, so everything becomes really reactive, people within an organization don't feel empowered as they don't know the rules of engagement. If you don't know how to play the game, you can't join in. Governance and security complexity, nobody wants to end up on the front page of the newspaper for something that they've done wrong with their data or their AI. So this is a fear that we see very often. Teams either lock everything down completely and slow down progress, or they open things up without enough control and creating risk on that one as well. Looking at scalability issues, so sometimes the architecture that exists simply can't meet the demands of what the business wants to do next and the next evolution of the business. I've worked with many clients across many industries over the years, and these themes repeat themselves with surprising consistency. So as I said, if some of them resonate for you, then you're definitely not alone in this. But the key point really for me is that most, if not all, of these challenges existed before AI. What has changed is the pace with which they're being surfaced and the pace at which they are causing problems for the organization. When decisions were slower, people had time to sense check things, to reconcile, to correct. But as automation increases, those buffers start to disappear. So the organization moves faster, but the weaknesses become louder. And just a quick check with everyone. So if you've ever been in a meeting where two dashboards disagree and the conversation becomes whose numbers are right, that is a data foundations issue. And if you've ever had analysts spend most of their time cleansing data instead of generating insight from the data, because you're using data from different sources, for instance, that is also a foundations issue. And if you've ever avoided using a metric because you don't trust it, that is also a foundations issue. The acceleration that we're seeing around AI just makes that impossible to ignore. And this is where I want to reframe the problem. So what we're seeing isn't a technology failure, it's a strategy foundation gap. So organizations invest in platforms and in tools, and they often have really ambitious goals and language around how they want to be data driven, but far fewer actually trust their own data consistently enough to use it as the basis for decisions, especially around decisions with risk attached. And when leaders say we want a trusted data source, or we want a single version of the truth, or we want AI ready foundations, those are no longer technology requirements, they're organizational requirements. They imply ownership, definitions, standards, processes for resolving issues, visibility of lineage and quality of the data, and clarity on what the priorities are and what matters to the business. But the gap appears when your strategy says one thing, but the foundations behave differently. And that's when the value of AI really starts to stall, not because the technology isn't capable, but because it's being asked to operate on unstable ground. So from here, I would like to make two concepts clear: what a real data strategy is and what we mean by data foundations and how they make strategy real. I think there's a lot of talk out there about data strategy, but it's often misunderstood. So in really simple, straightforward terms, this doesn't need to be something that's complicated. A data strategy isn't just a document, it isn't a vision statement, and it isn't a set of principles on a slide. A real data strategy should answer some very simple but very impactful questions. What data matters most to the organization? Not all data, that is not a valid answer. The data that actually drives outcomes and informs the decisions that you're making as a business. You also might have regulatory requirements that you have to meet if you're in a highly regulated industry, for example. Second question is, who is responsible for it? So not in a vague sense of, this team over here, this team over here, but a named person who is accountable for that data, for each data set, for the maintenance, for the access, for the updating of that data. There needs to be a name against it. And then what decisions depend on it? So why are you using this information? How are you using this information? Decisions define what good needs to look like in this context. And then what risks need to be managed. So it's not just about the security of the data, it's about how could it be misinterpreted, potentially, poor quality, misuse, any gaps around it. They're all risks that need to be actively managed. And then finally, what outcomes are we optimizing for? Because if you don't know the outcomes that you want, you can't prioritize, and you don't know when you've reached that point. So here's a test on the slide, and it's a test that I use with lots of different organizations. If your data strategy doesn't influence how decisions get made day to day, then it isn't operating. And that means, does it change what gets funded? Does it change what gets fixed first? Does it help you to prioritize? Does it change who owns what? Does it change how issues are escalated and resolved? Does it change which metrics get trusted and used? And if the answer is no to those questions, then the strategy might exist on paper, but it isn't changing any outcomes within your business. So when a data strategy is operating well, what does good look like and what does it actually do? It should set direction through all of the facets that I've called out here. So these 4 facets. Ownership. So every critical data source, every data domain needs a defined and agreed owner. And they need to be aware as well. You'd be surprised how many times data owners aren't aware that they actually own data and what that entails. So the role needs to be defined and it needs to be agreed. And this is not by committee, it's a single person who is responsible for the continuous management, updating, resolution, escalation of issues around that data. You can split it into a data owner and a data steward. That's completely valid and does work well in some organizations. Looking at risks should obviously be logged centrally. They should be managed through a clear process. And this is something that needs to be done on an ongoing basis as well. Things like quality degradation, unclear definitions, a lack of lineage are real risks when it comes to implementing AI within your organization. If we look at decisions, this needs to start with people to understand how they use their data currently, how they want to use data, and what decisions they make on a daily basis. And this is often where organizations discover that their data program is misaligned to the decisions that actually matter to the organization. And finally, outcomes. So if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, you will quickly lose momentum, direction, and enthusiasm. The outcomes data should support your business outcomes, and these outcomes help you to prioritize what to fix, where to spend money, where to spend time and energy. A good strategy should reduce confusion because it creates focus. What matters, who owns it, how we manage risk, and what decisions and outcomes we're optimizing for. It also lets people within an organization know how they can interact with data, and that promotes self-service, it builds confidence, and it promotes innovation as well. And this decentralization of data skills within an organization can be really powerful for democratizing data access, promoting self-serve. So onto the foundation. I frequently out myself as a really terrible gardener in order to explain this concept. It's important to understand that data is generated by humans and it reflects human behavior, decisions, wants, and needs. You cannot have AI without data. It just cannot exist. Most organizations are existing in a place where they have a lot of legacy systems, they have siloed data, poor quality information, they might have other organizations that they've acquired that aren't quite integrated. And these can be real blockers to progress. So back to the gardening side of things, okay? The last summer, I decided that I wanted to start gardening. I wanted flowers, I wanted fruits, vegetables, tomatoes, all of these things in my garden. So I went out, I bought the seeds, I bought little plant pots and some soil, put the seeds in the soil. I think I watered them once, maybe twice, and just expected that by leaving them outside in the great northeast weather where I live, that these things would just flourish and grow, and I'd come outside one day and there'd be lovely flowers and fruit and all the rest of it. But if any of you know anything about gardening, you will know that is just not how it works. It's not as easy as that. It's not just about planting things and watering them once. It's about that ongoing care and having the right conditions, the right structure, giving them the right amount of attention over time. And data works very much in the same way. You can't just store it and expect value to emerge without any sort of care or structure. If you have no definitions, if you're inconsistent, then you're never going to see the value without putting in that upfront effort. What happens in a lot of organizations is that people will build their own mini gardens. So local fixes, local workarounds, local spreadsheets, because they need to get that job done at the end of the day. And the organization appears to function on the front of it, but it becomes really fragile underneath that. Everyone's working really hard, but the foundations are really uneven. But the good news is that putting in the groundwork, the hard work, often viewed as the boring work up front, really dramatically increases your chances of success down the line, particularly if you're looking to bring in AI. So foundations are really the thing that determines whether your acceleration is going to be successful, whether you're going to get value out of your investments, and how your business is going to evolve into being an AI-driven organization. So what are data foundations? It's all about getting the basics right, and this matters because it enables everything else within your organization. When the foundations are strong, you can better understand how your business operates, you can define your strategic direction, you can have confidence in your organization's data. But the statistics, as you'll see in this space, are quite sobering. So many organizations report that their foundations either can't support AI at all, or they're actively struggling, and only a small proportion really consider themselves truly ready for AI. And the key point is that this isn't a tooling issue. The gap isn't about model performance, it's about how data is managed, governed, trusted, understood, accessed across the organization. And that's why your data foundations really need to be treated as that strategic differentiator. It's not a technical afterthought, it's not an IT problem. And to make this really come to life, hopefully, I've got a model that I've pulled together. So you may have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is from the psychology school of thought. It talks about what people need in order to realize their full potential, to be fulfilled as a human. And it starts with the basic things like breathing, food, water, shelter, sleep, and then moves up to things like health, employment, family, social ability, feeling a sense of love and belonging, all the way to the very, very top where we have self-actualization, which is where you feel that you have fulfilled your purpose, you are creative, you're purposeful, you are driven, you have your core beliefs. And what I've done here is build the data and AI version of this as well to try and give it some context. At the very, very bottom is your data generation. So how is the data generated? Through user content, through login, through sensors, whatever that might be. At the next stage up is things like the data storage, the pipelines, the lifecycle management. And at the very, very top, equal to that self-actualization, is AI, the prediction, the deep learning. You cannot move from the bottom all the way to the top without doing the work in between. You can't just give somebody the ability to breathe and some food and water and expect that they will become the best, most creative, actualized version of themselves. It's much the same with AI. You have to go on that journey up the pyramid, doing things like the cleaning, the standards, the quality, the labeling, the analytics that sit behind it. You just simply cannot jump from one to the other on that. Strong foundations make all of these things possible. And when you get the sequencing right, AI stops feeling chaotic and starts feeling purposeful and like a natural extension of the capability within your business. So a reflection here that I would suggest is, if you're struggling currently, which layer is feeling unstable today? Is it the collection? Is it the storage? Is it aggregation? It's something to reflect on that I think can be quite helpful. Equally, this is something I use often with clients. This is the data transformation journey that we take our clients through at Sopra Steria. It's an end-to-end view of the typical data transformation journey. I like this framing because it really helps you assess honestly where you might be today. You know, are you at the mission stage? Are you doing your business case? There's a really important part here around the people side, not just the technology side as well. But whereabouts are you on this journey, and other things that you've missed out that maybe you would like to go back to? You know, do you disagree with me? Do you think this should be in a different order? That is completely valid as well. But I think it's helpful sometimes just to reflect on the whole picture as opposed to each individual part of these things. So what happens when your foundation and your strategy don't align? Things that you would expect, I suppose. So foundations allow for duplication. Foundations rely on manual checks. You can't evidence your lineage or your quality. And as I said before, the acceleration of AI isn't creating these problems. These problems have always existed, but it just makes them feel more obvious, and it brings them to the surface a lot faster and makes them feel like a more immediate problem that needs to be solved. But these have always existed. It's just that speed amplifies that misalignment, and the faster you go, the more these gaps are going to show up, and the higher the cost of getting it wrong as well when you start investing in expensive tooling around AI and things like that. So how do we build better data foundations? It's all about becoming purposeful for me. So becoming intentional, starting with the decisions that you need to make and designing the data, collecting the data, using the data based around that. So be clear on your purpose. Improve the data quality at the source, define the ownership and the accountability, put simple governance in place, make the data accessible and understandable, and invest in the skills and data literacy that sit around it. None of this is glamorous work, really, but it is the work that turns that AI ambition into real, scalable, operational value. And what does good look like? This is a bit of a recap on things that we've already touched on, but when your strategy and your foundation align, things feel very different. You have named owners for your critical data domains, the escalation routes are clear, quality expectations are understood, the executives trust the numbers that are brought to them. And when that happens, AI initiatives scale with confidence rather than with caution. Strong foundations don't slow innovation, they allow strategy to move at speed. They create the confidence and the space for people to be innovative, to be creative, to get involved. And something that often surprises people, I think, is that foundations aren't the opposite of innovation. They are what makes innovation feel safe and repeatable. And the foundations reduce the amount of rework, they reduce the debates, reduce the friction, and increase the trust across the organization. Across large and complex organizations, this alignment is consistently what separates progress from frustration. It's also what allows organizations to make the most of the data they hold and ensure that AI implementation is set up for success. That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that was really useful. Hopefully you've added your questions in the Slido if you've got any questions. If you have anything else, feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat about these things. This webinar has been the second in our 3-part series. In our final session tomorrow, Gary and Jonty will be exploring how to learn faster through AI experimentation. They're both absolutely fantastic, really great speakers as well, so I highly recommend that you join that. If you haven't already signed up, you can do so using the QR code on the screen right now. We'll be sharing a recording of today's session with you all very soon, so feel free to share this with your teams. We'd also love to hear your feedback on today's session, so please do let us know what you found most useful. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon.